I'm not sure whether actually everyone in the room has heard about Eco Energy. We're a pretty new game in town. We've used the platform of independent resources to relaunch in April. So that relaunch included a rebranding as Eco Energy. It included a new board, a new strategy, the input of a strategic investor, and also equity raises, debt raises, leaving us now as a company with a market cap of £40 million. We've got about £26 million in the bank. That's about $35 million. And we're trading around about 4 million shares a day. So it's a really liquid stock, which for some of you, I hope will be very attractive. But who are Eco? What's our vision? What's the story for the future? Where are we headed? I think that those are all the questions that the people in the room here today will want to have answered. Well, we're an AIM-listed, entrepreneurial, exploration-led, gas-focused South American exploration and production company. We're value-driven. We need our assets to be technically robust and accretive in value for you, the shareholders. So we've got a really ambitious growth strategy across the region. Latin America, South America, from the Caribbean down to Patagonia. So our area of interest at the moment is pretty wide, and we're honing down on that as we speak at the moment. We've built a really experienced team, and one of the things that we say is people, portfolio and partnerships are the three keys for us. So people being the team, both internally and externally to the company. The portfolio, that's the asset base that we're developing and we're growing, and the partnerships that we're making both with companies that we work with and strategic partnerships that we hope to develop over the course of time. Gas is a really evolving story, and we'll come on to why it's so important in Latin America at the moment. But we are very aware that, you know, we're moving towards a much more carbon conscious community and environment, and therefore gas is really taking a front foot. We also have a situation whereby, as we all know, that the oil price has been severely challenged over the last 2 to 3 years, and gas is actually decoupled from that. So that's really important for our business strategy. So let's come to the first of those 3 Ps, people. As Dan said, I've joined the company as Chief Executive about 5.5 weeks ago now. I joined a team that has been pulled together by James Parsons. James is CEO of Sound Energy, and I know some of you are shareholders in Sound. This is a carefully orchestrated company. It's been pulled together. I like to think of it as a bit of a boy band of the E&P world at the moment. Not all of us boys, of course, but we've got James there as chairman. I've been brought in as CEO. I joined the company from Rockhopper, where I was for the last 7 years as the chief operating officer. And we've also got on board now our CFO, Will Holland. He's an ex-banker. He spent some time with Sound Energy. In fact, he brought the Tendrara project in from Fastnet. We have Julian Besser. He's our EVP of exploration. He's ex-BG. He was indeed exploration manager in Bolivia, and we'll come on to why that's so key for us as I move through this presentation. And we've got another couple of non-execs who are clearly very important to us. We've got Marco, who is one of our cornerstone investors through Continental Investment Partners. And we've got Steve White, who is the current chairman of Genel. So, you know, we've got names, big names here that are important to us. When I stay on people, we're also very close to being able to announce our new country manager in Bolivia, and hopefully we'll be able to say something about that over the next couple of weeks. So, why Latin America? Why a gas strategy in that region? This is a rapidly unfolding gas market. We've got a continent that is absolutely crisscrossed with infrastructure at the moment, particularly in the key areas that we're looking at currently. So across Bolivia, Argentina, Colombia, you see massive infrastructure that's already in place there. Almost everywhere has pipelines cutting across in that region. So most places are not very far from infrastructure. It's really gas hungry, it's energy hungry. We've got a real imbalance between supply and demand. We have a lot of gas being imported to the continent. All these green arrows that you see here are the input points for LNG that then has to be regasified. 40% of the LNG that is currently being exported from the US actually comes into to South America, to Latin America. So that's a really big figure. We know that the gas market is growing by about 1.6% per annum, and actually that's almost double in this region. So we've got communities that until 4 or 5 years ago weren't even connected to natural gas that are being developed. In Bolivia in particular, we have gas being exported. You know, Bolivia sits at the crossroads in South America, and we've got two of the largest economies that sit on either side. So currently they're exporting to Brazil and to Argentina, and those are all on very, very long-term contracts at really high gas prices. If you think about the gas prices that are being achieved in this region, it's over twice the Henry Hub price. So, you know, these are significant gas prices. And one of the things about gas sales agreements is that actually they're long-term commitments. You make these commitments for decades in some instances. So it's not a transient price base that you might have with oil trading. It's very much a long-term commitment and a long-term partnership that you make. So that's all very important to us. And, you know, when we focus into to the area that we have been focused on over the first few weeks of the company's life, and, you know, we are talking still about just being less than 6 months from the relaunch of Eco Energy. We've honed in on Bolivia. As I said, our exploration VP actually worked over in Bolivia for BG for over a year before he came to us. The USGS have figures that show us that there's still 24 TCF of gas yet to be found in Bolivia. Now, if I just come back to Noel's presentation earlier, you know, where he was talking about 30 TCF, one of the things that you might have noticed is that converts back in a shale gas environment to 2.5 TCF. So you're talking about recovery factors of less than 10%. But in a naturally fractured reservoir, which is what we see in this region, actually your recovery factors are up there in the 80–90%. So that converts directly. So the big numbers stay big numbers. As I said, we have export routes out to Argentina, we have export routes out to Brazil, and 77% of the gas currently produced in Bolivia goes to export at those high export prices, which is really significant. So what about the blocks that we've picked up, the first 2 assets that we're looking at in Bolivia? You know, they really are in the right postcode. I think, as I said at the AGM, we're not just in Mayfair, we're in Park Lane, and I think that's really important to remember here. We're sitting within this Tarija fold and thrust belt. That's the main gas accumulation within Bolivia. It's a prolific province. There's multi-TCF plays and fields already discovered. I'm not sure if this is actually working, but these are our blocks here. This is the Huaco block and the Rio Salado block that surrounds it. And these fields that sit close to, adjacent, and on trend with our blocks are all in the 2 to 6 TCF realm. And if we just use that 80–90% conversion factor, you know, these are substantial fields. And these wells flow at absolutely massive rates. We can be producing wells in this region are known to produce at between 100 and 150 million standard cubic feet a day. Even an offshore well, you know, a gas well in a conventional reservoir, you might think that 20 to 30 million standard cubic feet a day is a good rate. So these have the potential to really flow at massive rates if you get the geology right. And what do we mean by getting the geology right? We mean drilling these in a structure that is positioned in such a way that it is naturally fractured. So we hear about shale gas, and we have to actually go out there and frack it. In these instances and in this trendology, we have natural fractures that sit there within the well and enable that well to produce at these very high rates. So that's what we're after. That's our high risk, high reward exploration play that we are targeting in this particular region. So we did promise at the AGM that we'd be giving a number of 101s on what is a fold and thrust belt. And I'm going to wait for Julian to actually come to the next investor event to be able to run you through some of those. But effectively, you're looking to penetrate the structure at the top of one of these piggybacks, and that's where we'd expect the rock to be fractured. So I know some people have been saying, what's the environment like? What is it like actually close by your blocks? This is just giving us a Google Earth view of where Huaco and Rio Salado are. So you'll see that there's plenty of infrastructure around, and that's really important when we think about the costs involved in drilling these wells. We've got access to the site, there are roads, there are pipelines already in place. The main export line to Brazil and to Argentina is just over to the east here. We have gas processing plants as well that are here. Directly to our west, we have Shell, who will be spudding their well in a very similar environment in the next 6 months. And Repsol have just spudded their well just to the east of us. And just to scale here, this is 600 meters is a thickness of the type of reservoir that we'd be expecting in the block. If you put that next to the Shard and to the Gherkin, you can see how that scales up. So you know, these are massive reservoirs when you get it right. And I think that's really important to note. So the third of our 3 Ps, we've talked about the portfolio that we have at the moment, which is the 2 blocks in Bolivia. The next is really about partnerships. So the Huaco block that we signed up with Pluspetrol is owned 100% by Pluspetrol. Pluspetrol are one of the biggest oil companies in the region. They're a privately owned company, and that means that not necessarily anybody has ever really heard about them, because they're not your BP, they're not your Shell. But actually, the reality is that they produce 434,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day. That's an enormous production rate. So you know, they really are up there as one of the biggies. They're headquartered in Buenos Aires, and in fact our team is in Buenos Aires. Part of their rationale this week is to have further meetings with Pluspetrol, not just about the Huaco and Rio Salado blocks, but other opportunities as well. And they're an experienced operator. They've been in country in Bolivia for many, many years now. So they're well known in country, and they're a good operator, and an operator that we're delighted to be associated with. Again, we have YPFB. YPFB are the state-owned company. They have welcomed us with open arms. One of the key aspects in Bolivia at the moment is they have these long-term gas sales agreements. They have the production that they need to fulfill. Because of the decline in the industry, there's been a severe decline in the number of exploration wells that have been drilled over the last 5 years. We've seen that number coming down markedly. So they've had to put more incentives in place. So for a company like ourselves to come into the market now is absolutely fantastic, because they're putting incentives in place for people to explore. They're opening up their doors to us to look at other potential acreage that we might be interested in. They were happy for us to sign the technical evaluation agreement with Pluspetrol, and they're really keen to get new companies, new investors in country. Another tick in the box is that the UK government has very recently signed the necessary paperwork that means that the UK Export Finance are able to actually support projects in Bolivia and Argentina, and I'll come on to that in a moment. So you know, they've ticked the boxes. They're a stable government. They're and they're happy to welcome us into the country. I've got strategic alliances here. As we know, we've got £26 million in the bank, $35 million, something of that order. You know, these wells are expensive wells, and we've got a year now to work on the seismic to see whether or not we can develop the prospect that we believe is there, the multi-TCF prospect that we believe to be on block and maybe extending into the blocks surrounding Rio Salado. So how are we going to do that? Clearly, we probably would not be in a position to pay for all of that ourselves, and we'd want to bring in a partner or funding to help us with that. So strategic alliances are key to us. For those of you that are aware of the Sound story, it's been a real focal point, is to bring in strategic partners that can help fund, that can share that risk profile, but also share in that great reward. So, you know, again, high risk, high reward, both for the company and for a strategic partner that we would hope to bring in alongside us. Now, it is all about news flow, and I know for everybody in this room, it's about when is the next piece of news, because clearly the story for the company has to be around creating that story, taking it through the next 2 to 3 years to build the company up to what we believe it should be, to take advantage of this niche in the market that we think exists. So, you know, we've got work that has to be done on the licenses that we have. We've got the seismic reprocessing, and what that means is we're taking data that has already been shot, that was already shot by Plus Patrol back in the late 90s. Technology has changed, computing power has changed. That means we can actually reprocess this data, which was shot at very great expense, and we're getting it now effectively for nothing. We will pay for that reprocessing. The new algorithms that are available today that enable you to look deeper into the section, to be able to actually image these folds that we believe are there, that's going to take us around about 6 to 9 months. At which point we'll then be able to interpret it and really be able to make that investment decision. So the investment decision has to be that, yes, we see this prospectivity and we want to invest in a well and carry it forward. So we know what we're doing on the Huaco and the Rio Salado blocks. The Rio Salado block surrounds the Huaco acreage. The seismic extends across it. So actually it's not going to cost us any more to be able to analyse the data in that block than it did in the Huaco block. So it's kind of 2 for 1 in that respect. But, you know, this isn't necessarily just a Bolivian story at all. We've seen a niche in Bolivia. We've seen an opportunity. We've been welcomed warmly. We see great assets that are there. We may still add 1 or 2 more assets in Bolivia, but it is very much about what is the portfolio going to look like in total. You know, we are looking across the ABC of Latin America. That's Argentina, Bolivia, Colombia, and as I said previously, we're not going to stop there. If an opportunity comes up between the Caribbean or Patagonia, then we will look at it. But we need to be very careful and make sure that we don't completely pepper pot. We'd like to focus. We know what our strategy is, and so once we take that next step into the next region or country, we will focus on that for some time. So we need to pick up the assets, but they need to pass our scrutiny. We have very, very high technical scrutiny processes, so nothing's going to come past us that doesn't tick all the boxes that we need it to tick, both from a technical and a commercial sense. We need to have infrastructure close by, and it needs to fit within the portfolio. So whilst we're aware that that's what we need to do, it needs to be the right assets in here. So that really is the vision that we're looking for at the moment. So our hashtag Bolivia and beyond is absolutely that. Bolivia is there, it's at the core of our hopper, and beyond is what we're going to be adding into. So What is it that we are adding? Just to really summarise here, we're identifying opportunities in a counter-cyclical market. So, you know, the opportunities are there because other people aren't investing at the moment. If we just look at Argentina for a moment, which is where the team are this week, whether we'll be able to announce anything on that in the next few weeks, who knows? But hopefully, the opportunities are there. People are ready to invest. It's a country where people haven't invested for some time because the government has not really been supportive. We have a new government, well, it's a couple of years old now, with Macri. Our own Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, was in Argentina just a couple of weeks ago, trying to sort out a trade agreement. You know, the government are ready for people from the UK to invest there, and there are opportunities that we might not see in other parts of Latin America. So we can use our partnerships to access some of that acreage. We will use our own technical in-house expertise to actually bring that on. We can then bring new partners in, strategic partners, and we can actually go on, explore, appraise, develop, and monetize, which is what we're keen on. So, in summary, it's a new story, it's a new vision. We think we're headed into a niche market of gas in Central, South, Latin America. We're trying to take advantage of the bits of the story that we believe really work. So that's putting together a portfolio of high risk, high reward exploration, topping that up potentially with some lower risk, but still good reward appraisal. And if we end up getting some production into the bargain, fine, but that's not what we're out here to really focus on. But it's all about building our portfolio and using our people and creating our partnerships to develop that story. So, very happy for any questions.
I've got one question because I know that there'll be a lot of questions there. You moved over from Rockhopper and you had quite a good career there, and Rockhopper have got I think it's about 1 billion barrels of oil tagged down in the Falklands. You know, do you see that kind of story developing with Echo? Because you must, because you came from something that has got that story. So what do you see the future of Echo? Do you see it in any way tied with Rockhopper in that kind of way?
Well, I see the story developing in that kind of way. You know, when I joined Rockhopper, I mean, literally the discovery well had been drilled 2 weeks earlier. So my job in Rockhopper was to very much appraise and develop the story of Sea Lion and all the associated fields that sat around that, to build that 1 billion barrel basin. I mean, that was my job, that was my focus, that was my aim, that was my goal. Absolutely. I see that story progressing in the gas industry in South America. You know, it was an exciting proposition. I wouldn't have moved unless there was an exciting proposition. And I love the story. I think it's absolutely the right time to be trying to forge that path. I think the opportunities are there. I think the market is there. It's counter-cyclical, and there's just massive potential for the region.
And with Bolivia, just one last question before I throw it open to the floor. The chap in charge of Bolivia, it was Evo Morales. You know, wasn't he a socialist? Didn't he like put his foot on all the oil companies, all the national oil companies, and take these oil companies over? I know he's eased his foot off the neck of the oil and gas industry within Bolivia, but is there any chance that it could politically become the way it was 10, 15 years ago in Bolivia?
Well, as somebody else said earlier, you like to ask all the difficult questions, but actually this one isn't that difficult. So absolutely, there is Bolivia is a very nationalistic country. It's quite a socialist country. It wants to look after its own population. What is absolutely clear is that the gas export industry is contributing something, I think it's 43.9% the country's wealth actually comes from gas exports. So yeah, they went through a nationalisation process, but one thing to be absolutely clear on there was they did refund the companies that they took over, if you like. They paid massive amounts to those companies to compensate them during that process. And now what they have is YPFB, the main 100% state-owned company. Some of the companies that were taken over, so for example, BP became YPFB Chaco, that's 99% state-owned. Those companies have continued to exist, including many of the people that used to work for them. And the majors whose companies were nationalised, if you like, were compensated to quite an extent for that process. But actually there is a greater understanding that having done that and having created a licensing and fiscal system and fiscal regime that enables the population to benefit, that clearly actually they need inward investment. So they need international oil companies to come in and invest in the exploration that is going to enable them to fulfill those contracts. So without international investment, they wouldn't be able to continue to produce.
Okay, any questions? Any questions out there?
Can I just say something? I was asking about political risk in Bolivia. I mean, South American countries have got a habit of seizing assets, and you mentioned about people continuing to work for companies, but investors did lose out on investing in oil companies before on seizure of assets. They were the one group that did lose out. So what guarantee is there that there's going to be different this time in Bolivia?
We're in a risk industry. There's never a guarantee, but there is absolutely a desire by the country to increase the exploration, to create the gas production. You know, we've got Shell in there, we've got Repsol in there, we've got Petrobras in there, YPF from Argentina are just about to sign some contracts because they need the security of supply to Argentina. Gazprom are in there. So, you know, there are a number of companies that like us, are perfectly prepared to live within the regulations that exist at the moment. And there are regulations. There weren't regulations previously, and the country itself was not benefiting economically because the contracts were such that the country wasn't taking or wasn't having a very great fiscal benefit from the exploration and the production that occurred. But today, all of those contracts are in place. There is a legislation in place. Everybody knows where they stand. You know what the fiscal regime is. There's laws there that protect you. So it is a risk that I personally am perfectly happy to take because I see a real stability within the country.
You mentioned that Shell and Repsol are in already, and Petrobras and so on. You've picked up the license later on, presumably. Are you being left the bits and pieces? What did Petrobras think of the seismic when they looked at it? Sorry, plus Petrol.
Plus Petrol. So no, we haven't picked up the license sort of late on in the day. It's just that it was a license. If you think about, as I said, Plus Petrol produce about 434,000 barrels of oil per day. They have licenses across six other countries, massive license acreage positions across the globe, most of them down in South America. So it was a license that's been sitting there. It had seismic shot on it in 1999. It had come to our attention because, you know, people had been doing some regional studies, and they were absolutely delighted for us to come in. You know, they're going to have to contribute their own time and their own effort and their own energy into this. So to have somebody to come in and partner up with them to share technical ideas, and we get on very well with Plus Petrol at a technical level. You know, you need like minds in order to have successful partnerships. And as I say, our technical team are in Buenos Aires with their technical team this week, thinking about just the various parts of the workflow that we need to reprocess the seismic in a successful manner. So no, we haven't been left with we've not been left with the dregs, and we're absolutely in the right postcode.
You talked about asset number 3. I just wondered, how many assets would you like to add to portfolio in total?
Kind of depends on the scale of those assets, and it depends on where they sit within the chain. So it, you know, dependent. I think we've got room for at least another high risk, high reward exploration asset, at least one more. But you know, I think that we really would like to see a few potentially appraisal opportunities that maybe have a lower cost of development, of capital requirements, maybe something else that's earlier on the ground cycle, so needing its own seismic, 2 or 3D seismic to be shot. So the total number of assets will kind of depend on what the work commitments are that are associated with that, and what the how they sit in terms of their news flow and how they fit together. So I think, you know, as we add one asset, we'll be able to answer that question a little bit better. And it might be that we pick up a portfolio of assets. So, you know, in that instance, it might cover several parts of that chain.
Thanks. I know it's difficult. Do you kind of envisage you could add on all those additional assets using your existing 20-odd million cash balance? And what kind of timeframes are you looking at? I appreciate it's a moving target.
Yeah, and again, you know, it depends whether there's another whacko whereby actually there's a zero cost of entry, or whether it's going to cost us something to enter, or whether we can use our paper to enter, or whether we could raise some additional capital alongside an entry position. And each of those answers really requires us to know what the asset looks like, to know which is the right answer at that point in time. But for sure, £26 million is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money in this industry. So yes, maybe we need to use our paper, or maybe we need to raise some more money alongside entering another asset.
Thanks.
Okay, if that's it, I'll just wrap everything up now, and let's get yourselves a drink. And don't forget, you're going to meet the CEOs. Don't be shy of asking them any questions and approaching them when you do it during the drinks and the food session. Okay, thanks, Fiona.
Thank you.